Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, and perhaps even good evening. Thank you so much for dropping by and joining me for a very special, almost kind of belated Thanksgiving weekend edition of the Daz+ Pro Artist series. Welcome, everyone. Jeff from France. How you doing? Mr. Dragonate, Miss Julia is here. Super nice to see you. Peggy is here. Happy Thanksgiving to you too. X201 is here. Forgotten Lectures is here. Mickey Mouse is here. How exciting. Very, very cool. Bob is here. And probably many, many other people who are not in the chat, but that's totally fine. Say hello if you want. I'd be super chuffed about this. It's really nice to see so many of you here, because Thanksgiving is a big thing in the US, but like Jeff mentioned earlier, it isn't so much in Europe at all. But it looks like the sort of cyber deals, they're kind of spanning the globe. And my mom keeps telling me, my mom's in Germany, I'm here in South Florida, and yeah, she basically has the same sales events that we have over here in the US. Like Peter, how you doing, Peter? Good to see you. So yes, Thanksgiving, big thing here. Not so much in Europe, but I think for us in Europe, it's more like Christmas is the big get together. But in America, it's like here you have friends over, you invite family, you travel a lot. So sometimes, you know, your city seems a little empty. At least we're here, we are a bit touristy. So, you know, some people either come here or the locals go away, and it's kind of nice to see. So yes, good point. What do we think about Unreal Engine? One good point, and also it's tricky to learn. And this is why I thought I'm going to do this stream, because I'm always of the opinion that we should use 3D apps to what they're designed to do and what they do best. Like if we think about Daz Studio, that's fantastic when it comes to making characters, clothing characters, posing characters, and rendering characters. It's not so fantastic when it comes to loading in large environments. It has basic animation tools, but it might not be the best tool for that. It has basic draping tools with defaults, but it might not be a specialized tool for that. But other tools have that. They, like thinking of Marvelous Designer, yes, that is fantastic when it comes to making clothing, but load a large environment in that and it's not going to work. So I'm thinking if we use apps to what they're designed to be used for and then use them to their strengths, I think that's fantastic. And Unreal Engine is another such tool that is fantastic in so many aspects, but of course it's super difficult to get started with it. And that's why I thought maybe we can bring the two together, and I'll show you how we can create epic backgrounds by making our own HDRIs with Unreal Engine. and then bring them into Daz Studio and then do the render actually in Daz Studio. So use the characters and some props in the foreground in Daz Studio, but don't use a large background environment. I've done a public stream a while ago in which I've discussed how we can make our own HDRIs directly in Daz Studio, render out a spherical camera and then bring that in. And this is similar to that, but we're going to make the HDRI with Unreal Engine. And the good news about that is you don't have to be super informed about how to use Unreal Engine. So it's fairly easy to get started and move around in a scene, but then the hard work kind of starts. And this is why I want to show you how we can bring the two together. So perhaps, see what you did there. I like it. I like it. So let me show you how I made the promo for today's event. This is the scene in Daz Studio. And it looks like we only have a couple of bushes here from the Martin J. Frost collection. I think these are the Australian bushes. And we have a character and we have her little pug in there. And it's really easy to load them in, dress them up, drape the deforced dress and set up a camera. And it would be taxing on my system if I'd have like a big ultra scenery set in there. So instead what I did, let me just go and switch this over into Iray, let this cook for a little bit. Instead what I did is I created the whole background in Unreal Engine and then brought that in. Give it a second, and there's a few things that we need to know how Daz Studio handles HDRI so that we can change the size of them so that it matches the camera positions. This is without the dome. So first of all, of course, on the render settings tab, make sure draw dome is actually set to on. And then we have the magic environment that comes to life. But of course, all of that was not rendered in here, it was made in Unreal Engine and it doesn't exist in Daz Studio, which is why when I move my viewport, this is like killer fast. Even if I had like 2 or 3 other characters in there, it wouldn't really be a big issue for Daz Studio. But if I had all this as geometry in here, then my computer would struggle. And no matter how hard you try, your computer would always kind of struggle. So the way to do this then in Unreal Engine is to have a set, and you get so many of these assets for free. You can purchase them, you can make them yourself, and put in one object and use that object to create a spherical camera and then put that into Daz Studio and Bob's your uncle. There's a few things I wanted to bring to your attention just before we jump into Unreal Engine. And that's on the render settings environment under dome. This is of course where you load in your HDRI. Mine doesn't actually look that great. It looks very dark, but we're just going to crank up the exposure here. You can change this in Photoshop, but HDRI, it stands for high dynamic range image, and it has such a high dynamic range that if things appear underexposed or overexposed in the preview image, that's usually not a problem because there's so much detail in there that you can just go and shift this up and down and left and right. So by default, I believe this is what my scene looked like. So the background is a bit too large it's not as wide as I wanted it to be, and what I did here was adjust the dome scale multiplier, and that's one of those things that will allow you to essentially shrink the size of the dome of the HDRI, and as a result the HDRI looks smaller. So the default is 100 dome scale multiplier. Remember that, kids. If I put this to 50, then you'll see that my background kind of comes in more. And let me go and do this even more, like say 20, and you can see how more background is shown. If I do this really extreme, if I set it to 5, or even to something more extreme like maybe 2, then you can see what's actually happening here. So you can see the sphere that Daz Studio is rendering there. But if it becomes too small, then not only do you see this kind of all the straight lines are bending in, and that's probably not what we want to have on our picture. So if I'd have to zoom in, if I have to frame it up something like this, I can see that the fence is kind of distorting. So I don't want to do that, and of course I don't want to have a framing kind of like this. So yeah, dome scale multiplier, that's kind of number one of how you change the size of your HDRI. There's a couple of other things I'll talk about later. I think mine was set to 10, and then I had a camera set up as well. And then the last thing is add a little bit of depth of field so that the background just gets thrown out of focus just a little bit, and it's kind of cool. So let's see how we can make something like this in Unreal Engine from a set that already exists. And then later on, I'll show you how you can use the foliage tools to create landscapes like this inside of Unreal Engine completely free. That's requires a little bit of knowledge, but you know, if you have a little bit of time off over Christmas, I strongly recommend look into that, because if you keep collecting content in Unreal Engine, free or paid, doesn't matter. There's just so much good stuff that you can use to create your own backgrounds from that. Let me go and show you a project I'm working on right now. It's a tropical island, and that I've built with foliage tools, and it's not quite there yet, but it's enough to get us going into how do we create HDRIs with Unreal Engine. Every month, I think Epic have like 5 or 6 products that are free, and you can pick them up and use them. License is included, and for HDRIs, this is just awesome. Some assembly is required. It's just like in IKEA, isn't it? It's just because the tools they take a little bit of getting used to, but if you've been a fan of Carrara or Bryce in the past, you're going to feel right at home with this and just be staggered by, man, this is fast. So this is my scene here, and it's tropical island. It's got water. It's got a little floaty boat here, which I'm still working on. It doesn't quite bob up and down, so perhaps we're going to look at a different part of the island. It's got a bit of a volcano type mountain here, and it's got a lot of these trees. And I think this beach isn't as exciting as the one further around the mountain. This was actually a tutorial that I've followed. I think, was it by the Unreal Sensei? No, it wasn't. It was by, oh man, I've forgotten. What a shame. Let's go and use this as our little core for the HDRI that we're going to create here. So the principle is, is it even better over here, maybe? Even better over here. It's more light in there. Perfect. So this is going to be, imagine I want to shoot from sort of the beach. I want to shoot something at the beach. The first thing I'll think about is, where would my camera be in real life? And that is where I'm going to put my spherical camera so I can render this thing out. Let's say I put this on the beach like this. There is trial and error involved, but generally you want to have this so that it's kind of about a meter 20, meter 50 tops above ground if you're shooting something with people in it. If you want to shoot something from higher up, then put the spherical camera there. And it can be rough. It can be kind of a rough guess. It doesn't actually matter where you point the camera, because it's going to be a spherical image anyway. So it doesn't matter if I look into this direction or into that direction. Everything will be put onto that camera. So when you're here, there's this object that comes up with the little quick add icon here. It is technically in the list of all classes, but that list is rather long. So you can pick it from here, or another little tip, if you know exactly what you're looking for, just click on this and start typing. There's no search field as such, but you can just start typing and Unreal Engine will recognize that. So we need a scene capture cube. So type the first few letters, scene capture cube. That is what we need. You click that, and then it comes in, and it looks like a camera. There we go. It kind of is, it kind of isn't a camera. So this is what we need. Maybe it's a little bit high. I'm going to bring this down a little bit with my shortcut keys here. So that's my object. Currently, notice viewport performance is pretty good. That's what we like. But the moment I change something, it'll kind of tank, and it depends a little bit of how heavy your set is. So with this object selected in the details panel, have a look at this thing that says texture target. And don't worry if you don't pick it up on the first time. I'm going to do this multiple times so that we all, learn how to do this. So details panel, under scene capture, there's a thing called the texture target. It's currently set to none. If I go and drop this down and create myself a cube render target from this, the first option that comes in, then I'll go and get asked, where do you want to save this? I don't have anything. I might just put it into my cinematics folder. You can also make a HDRI folder, for example, and in there I just need to give it a name down here. I might call this one HDRI cam, just so that I remember what that is. Hit save, and now you notice that the viewport performance has kind of tanked. So I've lost quite a few frames per second, and it's not quite as smooth anymore as it was before. And that's because I'm now essentially rendering that camera out live as often as Unreal Engine allows me to do this with the resources that my computer has. Once you're done with this, you can just go and change the texture target back to clear, and then the viewport performance is going to come back. We're going to just leave it as what I had there. If I go and double click this icon now, then another window opens up, and that shows me the HDRI as it would come out. And you can see by the waves here that this is actually a live HDRI, which is kind of cool. It's live in respect, and if I go and just make this a bit smaller, whoops, just so that we can see both this and that together. If I go and move my camera, you can see that this actually updates live. So wherever I put my camera, the spherical image is gonna come with it, which is kind of cool. And it is, of course, always landscape. So this is what it looks like. Yeah, no matter where I move it, this is where my HDRI is going to come out. So this is important to remember. If we shoot a couple walking down the beach, and from shot to shot the location changes, you might want to create 2 or 3 HDRIs going down the beach wherever they would be going, so as if the camera is really following them. So for every different location on the island that we want to shoot, we need a different HDRI. So that's number one. If say this is our HDRI, there's a value here, size X, that we can change. I think the default is something like 1 pixel, which is this is basically nothing. But I think, was it 256? This would be the height of my HDRI. So 256 by twice as much. The highest we can set this to is 2048 in Unreal Engine. And now it's becoming obviously, larger, but this is the largest you can do. And I think it's for performance reasons. There is a way to increase that value, but only if you go and compile Unreal Engine from source. So we're not going to be dealing with that today. That's the size. Set this to, as high as you want it, like in my case, 2048. And I'm going to close this. Now comes the fun part where we're actually going to export this thing out into Daz Studio. So if you open your content browser, Control Spacebar does this. You can go into the folder in which I had my HDRI cam saved. I can also go and save this just in case. If you right click on this, you can go and turn this into a static texture. So this is now gonna grab one of the live frames that we've been making and save it as a single object, like this one here. It almost has the same kind of color stripe, and it's got the same name as my HDRI cam. So I'm going to go and rename that just by F2, click F2, and then call it HDRI Beach 1, perhaps, in case I wanted a couple of others. And that is now my static texture. So you can go create others, you can move the camera and just create other HDRIs just like that. For me, I'm going to go and turn this into clear. And now I get my viewport performance back, just in case I wanted to do that. There's one last thing that we need to do. This is saved it as an Unreal Engine asset, but it's not saved it on a hard drive in something that we can use in an external program. So for that, right click on it, head over to Asset Actions, and then head over to Export. I'm going to go put this on super unceremoniously on my desktop here, and I'll call it, well, HDRI Beach. Perfect. The only one thing that you need to change is the format. So Save As Type is by default set to DDS. That's a format I'm not familiar with, but if you drop that down, you can save it as HDR. And that is something that both Photoshop as well as Daz Studio understand. Call it that, hit save, and that's that. Technically, we're done with Unreal Engine now. What I like to do is to save myself a few GPU resources. I like to press Control-R, and then that will stop the real-time calculations. So I can still go move around in the viewport, but the light bounces that Lumen calculates are not calculated on a frame-by-frame case anymore. And if I just pause it there, then it's just gonna, freeze any simulations, and it's gonna save me so much GPU power. And your fan's gonna thank you for that later. I'm gonna go put this in the background and go back into Daz Studio. Start with maybe a brand new scene here. I won't save this here. And then we're going to see how we bring this brand new HDRI into Daz Studio, what it looks like, and what we can do with it. A live tsunami bearing down on the beach couple. Very good storytelling there. I like the way you think. I like the way you think. So I'm going to go, just so that we have an object to look at, I'm going to go and create a new primitive. I'll make it a sphere. With that sphere selected, I'll just go and put a silver material on it, just because. Hello, silver material on it. We don't have it. No surface. What? That can't be right. Oh, because I'm not on the editor. Duh. There we go. I have a surface. Select the surface, head over to presets, and I'll go into Iray. These are my default resources here. Metal, and just put something like platinum, iron, titanium, metal brushed, maybe iron. Iron is good. There we go. Now we see reflections, and I thought that's kind of my point. We want to see reflections here. I'll go and close this down, and I'll go over to my render settings tab, and under environment, under dome, I'll go and click into this little guy here and pick myself the HDRI that came out of Unreal Engine. This one here, Beach HDRI. It takes a second to process, depending on how large that is. And eventually we should see that this reflection hasn't caught up. And in the bottom right corner, I can see my bar is still working on something. That's now changed. So now I can see my beach reflecting in my silver ball. So that's already pretty exciting. So we're seeing what we saw in Unreal Engine. That's pretty cool. So now the next thing we need to do is make sure that we draw a dome. And I'm in Filament right now, and the dome is drawn slightly different in Filament and in Iray. So in Filament we can kind of preview this, but we won't be able to override any of the properties here. So this is a good example of seeing this is not quite wide enough. So if I wanted to have the beach on the ball on the beach, it's just not quite wide enough. And in Filament, there's nothing I can do to override that. But if I switch this over to Iray, we have all kinds of things that we can set here. I think on my render settings, under general, I'm just going to go and render the active viewport so that we have the whole picture. I think I might also turn this into a higher res object with edit object geometry, convert to sub D, just so that the jagged edges go away. Yeah, but so far we now have an object, metallic object, that integrates into something I can move incredibly fast, and Iray is catching up more or less in real time, so that's very, very exciting. So imagine what that can do to your storytelling if you have to render a ton of scenes. Shadow integrates really well. I mean, the shadows here are a bit harsh in this HDRI because we had direct strong sunlight, but if you had something with more diffuse light, then they would be super smooth, just like they would be in reality. So very, very cool. Web Soul is here. How's it going, buddy? Good to see you. So it's not wide enough, and that's why I said earlier under environment dome we can go and change a couple of things. First of all, the dome mode, it's by default set to infinite sphere, and it doesn't give us a lot of adjustment options. We can turn the dome around, so if we wanted to see a different part in the background, if we had a camera framing correct, then you can turn the dome orientation Y, you can change that, and then the HDRI moves around without your camera moving around. You can do the same with the Z and X, so if you fancy something that looks like it's shooting on an angle, you can do that, but I don't recommend it. Usually Y is what we do to change these things. If this takes a little bit too long in Iray and you want to have a better way of adjusting this, I suggest switch it over back to Filament and then make use of the real-time adjustment. Even if the zoom factor might not be perfect, you'll be able to do this very accurately without having to wait for Iray to catch up. So I'm going to leave it as it is. Switch this back to Iray, and then we'll go and talk about the different ways in which we can render our sky dome. Infinite sphere means no matter how far we zoom out, we will never get to a point where we see the the environment dome, never. That's by design. So this is something, it's kind of an easy mode, if you will. But as artists, we often get involved in the nitty gritty. So switch this here from dome mode of infinite sphere to finite sphere or finite box. Not the with ground options, just the regular ones. Finite sphere means we can set a value for the size of the sphere, whereas finite box means it's not a round sphere into which our HDR gets projected. It's a cube, and that's great if you want to avoid the geometric distortions that you get with very wide things, or interiors that are usually not round on the inside. So I'm going to use finite sphere now, and nothing has changed, but I do get a few more options here that I can play with, and one of them is what I said earlier. It's the dome scale multiplier. So there's this as well as the radius. They're technically They do the same. I tend to use the multiplier instead of the radius. And if I go and set this to something lower, like 50, then I see more getting projected here. So I think maybe 10 sounds like a limit. I think it can go slightly lower. But if you go too low, like I said, then you'll see that eventually you'll just see the dome creeping into your shot. And you don't want to do that. You want to avoid that, just in case you're ever in that situation. And we'll look at this in another example as well. If you make that something really extreme, you'll see that the trees start bending in. If you, instead of sphere, use finite box, those distortions will be evened out and you retain how wide your HDRI looks. But the trouble is, because the box is also fairly small, eventually as you move around, you might see there's something not quite right with the perspective, like down here. That's just not quite working, and that's because technically this thing is now a box. But as long as it sells the illusion, we're totally fine with that. So you can use these two things, finite box and finite sphere. Just don't go under. I suppose 5 is like the limit, the lower limit that I would suggest you can use without running into these issues here. In my case, I think it makes almost no difference, but I can see, an environment that I've made myself in Unreal Engine. That's kind of cool. So very, very exciting. There's a couple of other things that we can look into. Like, one is that you can, I don't know if we see it here, but if you ever do get jagged edges due to the size and the resolution of the HDRI, if you see something that you'd rather blur out, there's this thing called the environment lighting blur that you can switch on, and then it almost doesn't make a difference here, but it just makes things a little bit fuzzy on the HDRI. The other thing that you should remember is that there is it's not so much how the background is rendered, but how reflections are rendered. So if you want them to be super sharp, I think by default they're set to something that could be made a bit clearer. So if you look at the ocean and at this mountain here, we saw that a little bit more clear in the background, but not so clear in the reflection. And that's the environment lighting resolution. That's set to 512. That's a really good starting value. But if you wanted to improve the quality or even blur it out more, you can increase or decrease that value. So if I set this to 2048, then you should see that we see more detail on the mountain. And you can set this as high as you want. You can try. This looks even sharper now. And I believe you can also set this to something like really low. And then you should see it getting fuzzier. Of course, demonstration effect, we don't see that. So this is something that it basically subdivides the dome that reflects the light onto the inside. And if that's set to something higher, then you have more light bounces that are being calculated. That's really all that does. So as I said, default works rather well for me. There we go. And that is how we can sell the illusion. You put characters in, they behave nicely. If you wanted to throw the background out of focus while retaining some action in the foreground, you can use foreground elements. And that's another nice idea. Let me just try this, see if we can bring in somebody who walks on the beach and see what that looks like. You may also have to help this along with some additional lighting if you want to emphasize the situation. So here, this is the sun here. So we're getting something like a light from the front. And to make that look really good, I would say use something like a spotlight from a similar direction. Let me see. We have Kin for Genesis 9. We can use her. There's also the dog. Let's use Kin. We like Kin. And then we'll just put her into a standing pose. I won't bother with hair because you know how to do that. And we'll see if we can turn this into a handsome looking image. I have a new computer, by the way, and that means most of my content is not quite installed. So perfect. I like the Angie outfit. Let's do that. Jeans. As I've parented the jeans to the sphere, that did not work out so well. Do the top, and I'm not going to do the deforce, but it's, you know, it would be fairly easy to do that as well. I'll just give her a pose with the Pose Architect by 3D Universe that lets you dial in poses really fast and easy. And I'll go and turn you maybe around, whoops, something like that. And maybe the sphere can kind of go next to you. And I'll show you another interesting thing about HDRIs. There's something that you may not have known before. And this only is an issue if you ever use two objects, how the ground shadows are calculated, or in fact the ground of the HDRI. So we don't want to position it on top of the stone. We want to go and put it onto, you know, onto the ground here. Let me go and put this sphere next to her. Something like that. So that's almost looking handsome as a super fast little example. But I'm going to go and make a camera here that we can go back to this. New camera, copy perspective view. And one thing that... I might just go move her over a little bit. Just away from the stone here. That was my only consideration. There. So one thing that you may need from time to time is, if I just go and zoom this in through my camera here, is that one object. So currently what Iray does really well here, it looks at any real 3D geometry in your scene, and it says, hey, wherever that is on the ground, if you have one object, it looks at that object's lowest level and says, hey, this is where the ground of the sky dome needs to be, so that I can render this shadow catcher and blend that in properly. But watch what happens when we go and grab the sphere and move the sphere down like this. If I say I wanted to have the sphere sink into the sand a little bit, if I do that, then it looks like the sphere is still on the ground. It's not sunken into the sand, but the person now seems to be hovering, so there's no more ground shadows at all. And in fact, when we zoom out, we can see that the ground shadow is calculated still, but not at the right place, and that is bad. Oh, I'm sorry, the new specs, the new computer. Yes, good point, Jeff. Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't want to keep you suspended there. Let me just finish that thought, and I'll come back to that. So if this ever happens to you, I'm sorry, I didn't want to build up suspense and then, you know, let you all down. I didn't want to do that. We'll have a look at that new computer in a second. So to remedy this, we need to tell Iray that we want to be in charge of where the lowest level is. This is a really nice automation. If you only have a single object, you never have a problem with ground contact shadows. But if you have multiple and they are not all aligned on the ground and one needs to be sunken in, then you can do then you can go back to environment and ground over here. That's on the render settings, environment and ground. And there's the ground position mode, and that is set to auto by default. And that's kind of good because it's a really easy, groovy, easy mode. But if we set this from auto to manual, you'll see that now my character is on the ground and the sphere is is sunken in. So this is where we can say the ground X, Y, and Z origin, where that's supposed to be. So the ground Y origin is how high this thing needs to be rendered. If I shift this up, then we go and sink her feet and more of the sphere into the ground as high as you want, if ever you need that effect. And then 0 is of course 0, and then the other way around we can make it so basically like what Iray did automatically. You would have looked at the bottom of the sphere, and then you can put this wherever you needed it to be. So if you need her to stand on a pebble or something, then ground origin Y is what you need to change to sell that illusion and make that sort of a believable thing here. So that's really all there's to it. And what this means is that you can go and use Unreal Engine to an advantage without having to know it inside out. All you need to know is, how do I render in a set? How do I bring in this scene capture cube? How do I export a HDRI? And how do I deal with these settings? And it'll speed up your render pipeline like there's no tomorrow. So yeah, this is something I find just incredibly exciting because it speeds up rendering so much. Fix the reflection, Andre. When you adjust the ground, why would the reflections change when you change the ground? Like if I change this to like 30, what is it that you think would need to change on here? Oh, that's what you mean. Okay, I think I know what you mean. Yes, no, good point. No, I don't think there is. Well spotted. No, you're right. The reflection does say she's standing in the water, but clearly she's not. Hey, well spotted. I didn't even see that. Let me look into that. No, I have no idea. I have a feeling it's probably because when we change the dome scale multiplier, let me just go and change that and watch the reflection and see if the size of the reflection changes as well. Very well spotted. I had no idea this would do that. Let me go set this to 50. It looks like that reflection stays the same. If I put this to 200, yeah, the HDRI changes, but the multiplier doesn't seem to change at all. That reflection always looks the same. Well spotted. I wonder if that's an Iray thing, or if that can be changed. I mean, we can try. Good point, Andre. Instead of using the dome scale multiplier, we can also change the dome radius. So if you change that, does that have an impact just on the reflection here? No, it doesn't. So yeah, it looks like this is kind of a fake calculation. One thing that will help you out, and this is a bit like a filmmaker's trick, isn't it? If you go and take the sphere and go to your surface properties, and you go to base, and you go to glossy, and you just go and crank up the glossy roughness so that it's not well, I didn't mean for it to look like this. I meant for it to look just less, less rough. There we go. Then we can barely see it. That's one way to change it, but it's probably not what you want. So let me look into that. I've never noticed that before. Another option is to move the lady away from the water. Good point. Or fix it in the post, fix it in Photoshop. That's another possibility. Interesting. Yeah, so if you see something like that, perhaps, blur it out. That's a possibility. It's all done with smoke and mirrors. It's especially so if you look at video games done with Unreal Engine. Sometimes you see the worst reflections being calculated on the outside of the screen or as you move the camera. Like I was playing the Talos Principle 2 the other day, and in one scene you're in this mountainous environment with, there's a lot of trees, mountains, there's water behind it, and the trees reflect in the water as you come to the water's edge, and you go, oh, that looks pretty, and then you move the camera up so that you see the mountains, and at that moment the trees rather abruptly get switched out, and now the water reflects the mountains instead of the trees, and you think that wouldn't happen in reality. You'd see both, and then but yeah, Unreal Engine doesn't do that. Lots of ground fog. That is exactly how we do that. Yes, well spotted. Ground fog, just in case. It's in where is that again? It's in here somewhere. Matte fog and atmospheric ground fog. Here, switch that on, and we're gonna be okay. That's too much fog, isn't it? No, but well spotted. I appreciate that. It's something that is something I've never noticed before. Let me show you another one, and we'll leave the character and the sphere perhaps in here and just swap out the HDRI. Let's do that. Let's in fact go close this project. Let me show you something without water, so it doesn't happen again. I'm not going to save it. It's something that might be fantastic as a HDRI generator, and it's called, this is a really heavy set, it's called the City Sample. It's a free set from the Unreal Engine marketplace, and they use this to showcase the Matrix Revolution, Reawakened, something with and they use this set as the backdrop for it. And it's heavy, so I'm not going to lie to you, this is like 100 gigabytes worth of a download, and it takes quite a long time to compile the shaders the first time you launch it, but there's a lot of stuff in here. If you haven't seen this before, thank you, Brian, that's fantastic. If you haven't seen this set before, it is something that features a randomly generated city, kind of like New York, and it comes in two versions. If I go and load up the smaller one of that, there's big city level, and there's a city open level, and there's small city level. Let me go and do that, the small city level. Let me go and open that. And then we'll have a look at a living, breathing city. And this is great for backdrops if you have like an office environment, especially if that office is like on the 51st floor or something. You need a HDRI that isn't shot on ground level. You need this to be elevated. And yeah, this is what you can do with this set. And it's fantastic because it's just generic. It's just showing big city type thing. Oh, do you think it's the slope of the beach, X201? Oh, interesting. While we wait for this, let me just tell you the specs of my computer. So it's a workstation, HP Z8 G4 workstation from 2017. I think this is probably from 2018 or 19. That's when kind of the warranty ran out and people sold it, and I could pick it up relatively cheap on eBay. It has two Xeon Platinum processors, 8160, and it has 256 gigabytes of system RAM, which is a lot. But with a set like this, you do benefit from having a ton of system RAM. I'm still having my RTX 3090 GPU, so there's a single GPU in there. And yes, that is that's nice. It's also much quieter than my previous Z840, which is kind of the previous generation of this line. Yes, I needed something bigger, slightly faster, because my client work's getting more demanding, especially in Unreal Engine. And yeah, I thought it was going to be a good investment. This is what I said. It's 256 gigabytes of system RAM. That's what it has. 256. It does that, but you know, hey, my neighbors don't know that it's me, so they just know, hey, in this neighborhood, power consumption really isn't what it used to be. Do you know? Good point. Actually, let's have a look at the task manager that I run all the time, and under performance memory, here it is. So sometimes this is something I didn't know either. This purple stuff here, that is the actual current RAM Windows is using. This bit here, that is something that's cached, so it's still in use, but it could be unloaded. Yet if it's in here, it will make programs much faster to run, and it's beneficial to have that. So sometimes I have it that this bar goes all the way up to here, and I have literally no free memory at all, and everything is kind of cached, and that is good. That is really good, because that's what makes Windows so much, you know, more performant. Yeah, I think this is, I have to put this in sleep mode so that Julia can boil the kettle. Oh, does it, Jeff? How interesting. No way, really? That is so cool. Was it an analog TV set, you think? That is so funny. Yeah, we don't realize it. I mean, how many things we just switch on and we just think, yeah, well, let's get a bigger power supply. Well, but it's like, you know, a million people do that and all of a sudden consume twice as much power just because NVIDIA demands we need more, man. Okay, here we go. Preparing static meshes. There we go. That's nice. That's cool. Just in case you decide to download this set, you will find that usually it'll just show you water and you think, where's the city? And then the moment you play it, it actually gets loaded in. And this is because they use a system that has been introduced with Unreal Engine 5 that's called world streaming, and that means that the whole world is divided into small grids, and as the player approaches a grid, that grid gets loaded in, the geometry of whatever's there gets loaded in, and something that's behind them gets unloaded, so that you can walk through a large environment and developers don't have to worry about making sure they put trigger points in there, so it all happens automatically. For that, just in case you want to try it with this set here, under Window World Snow, where was it again? Was it world setting? I don't think it was world setting. It was, don't tell me, it was world partition. There we go. World partition editor. That's the thing. So if I hadn't drawn a rectangle around this, just with left click and drag, and then you right click it and then you say load selected regions, then these things come up. If you don't do that, then nothing is here, and that's really not what we want. So just in case you play with this, open the world partition and then left click and drag a square around the area of the city here. And then you go right click and say load region from selection, and then it takes a moment, and then all these missing things that were not shown, they like gradually pop into the scene, and then you will see a similar city to me. So I'm going to go and close this down. This is 3 by 2.3 kilometers in size. You can play this, so hit play and then takes another moment, and you can walk around with the character, but we don't really need to do that. What I wanted to show you is if I click that, then there's live traffic and live pedestrians are being generated. So depending on if you want these in your HDRI as we export it, you can go and switch this not into play mode but into simulation mode. I'll show you once Unreal Engine is capable of responding again. So right, good point. You make a good point. Forgotten Lectures makes a good point. There's a major difference between the consumer graphics cards. In case you're in the market for a new NVIDIA GPU, the RTX, the so-called RTX cards, those are like the RTX 30 something, 40 something, they are usually built that they have these fans on the side and they have the ports on the back, and that's what you put into your PC. But the problem is that it's designed for a single GPU use, so you blow everything that all the heat that the GPU generates gets blown into your case, and the case is supposed to then extract it. But in the professional realm, we often use more than one GPU, and that's problematic if you put two of those too close to one another, because the one that is supposed to blow out air would have another GPU next to it, and we can't really have that. So these A cards, they are kind of a slightly higher certified, and they're meant to be packed into PCs in multiples. And they have the similar price tag, they're slightly more expensive, same performance as the 30 and 40 series cards, but they extract the heat directly out of the back, and that is more beneficial for sort of business use, and they also use less power. So very good tip. I'm thinking of getting one of those for Julia's new computer. So we can go and run around, and if we encounter people here at the come on, my computer's still loading things. We can encounter pedestrians here. She's having a handbag and crossing the street. Traffic literally follows traffic signs and stuff, so that's kind of nice. So if you wanted to have something like this as part of your HDRI, then you can capture that as well. I'll do it once with and once without. Escape gets you out of this eventually. And we can do the same thing as we did before. So really all you need to know about Unreal Engine is how to load in a set, how to navigate around, and then how to bring in this HDRI system and render out a HDRI and bring it into Daz Studio. So let's put this directly in the center of the intersection here. So remember how to do this. At this top little plus icon here, you can either go to all classes and then scroll way down and then find the scene capture cube, or you can start typing. Just click this inside scene capture cube, not the 2D one, it's this one here, the 3D one. Click it, and then somewhere close to where the camera is, that's where this thing is going to get spawned. And then you can either use these arrows here, or you can hold down Control left click to move it along the x-axis, Control right click to move it around the y-axis. It's really handy for level building, or Control and left and right click together to move it up or down. So this also works for rotation. To switch between these things, switch this thing off is Q, then W is to bring the transform gizmo in. E, that's all like the top Q, W, E, R, those keys in a row. Q switches it off. W is translate. E is rotate. Same thing, Control right click does this. Control left click would do that. It's very handy. And then R would be scale, but scaling we don't really scale the camera here. So yeah, but that's how you can do it if you don't want to hover and left click over these things. Oh, and then if you ever needed to switch between global and local, that is either this icon here, that's global and local transforms, or you can click, you can switch Control and the tilde icon on your keyboard. That's the shortcut for that, just in case you ever needed that. So position the camera, kind of position it over the ground, sort of in the middle of all these intersections here. And then over here on texture target, where it says none, click on that and create a cube render target. Save it somewhere nice. I'm going to go and make myself another folder here. Maybe call it HDRIs. And in it, you're going to call it HDRI cam or whatever you like. But I think, you know, it makes sense. And now I can see struggling viewport performance, but we know that, and that's totally fine. So double click into this to change the settings, because you probably want it as large as possible. This we can now see that this is, I'm going to go and put this to, if you type something in higher than 2048, like say 4096, it'll go and default back to 2048. But eventually I'm looking into compiling my own version of Unreal Engine so that I can see what the drawbacks are and making an 8K HDRI out of this, see what happens. The shed will win. Yeah, let the shed win. And then put the new computer in the new shed. How about that? This looks very overexposed. I haven't found a way to turn this down, but maybe in the future I'll be able to do it. It doesn't matter though, because all the information is in here. I've seen worse HDRIs in Photoshop, and Photoshop can deal with that information just fine. So I thought maybe if you adjust the brightness curve, anything would happen here, but it doesn't seem to do that. So I'm going to leave everything as it is. Just change the size in here, 2048. Close it down, and then in the content browser, in your magic folder that you've made there, right click on this and create a static texture. And that is the thing that's actually your HDRI. So I'm going to go and call this one HDRI intersection. Control Shift S to save everything, and then with that object, they look so similar, so make sure this is renamed from HDRI cam, because you want to probably reuse this and move it into different positions. And then this one is your actual texture cube that you can go and export. So asset actions, and then head over to export, and then switch it to HDR, important, and then save it. And then that is what Daz Studio understands. I'll press Control R, put this in the background, go back to Daz Studio, where my trusty assistant Kin and the sphere are still with us. And here on the render settings tab under environment, I'm going to go and switch this out to intersection. Boom. Takes a moment. Maybe I'll seize the opportunity. Oh, there we go. To pour myself another cup of coffee. That was faster than I had expected. Good to know. Which of you have updated to the latest version of Daz Studio 4.22? And how do you like it? Any issues with it? Anything positive about it? Anything different about it? Do let me know. So this is now, it needs less intensity than we had before. So you can either go to the environment intensity or the environment map and either switch these values to something lower. I'm going to stick with the intensity here and put it maybe to 0.1, a tenth of that. So that's not bad. Maybe even to 0.05, half of that, or maybe to 0.01. That almost looks like what we had in Unreal Engine there, so I might leave it there. And same thing as before, we don't seem to have, it's a little wide, but the moment we go and switch that back to Iray, we'll see that all our previous values for the dome scale multiplier are still going to kick in. And now we see wide road here. And you can also see very soft shadows here, almost no shadows. But that's just what an overcast day looks like. So quite nice. I'll set this up from scratch in a moment, just so that we get a little bit of practice of where these values are in the render settings, just in case you've joined late, or if you want to, if you haven't quite gotten it on the first time. Yeah, but there we go. Once again, very cool. This is another cool example of where we have a lot of architecture, and you can see, depending on the angle that I'm shooting here, you can see that the buildings are kind of bending in, and that's once again because my dome scale multiplier is so low. So even at 10, I can see there's so much foreshortening going on that the buildings are, they're bending in here, they're bending down. But if you need a shot like that, just switch it over from finite sphere to finite box. And depending on where those buildings are, assuming you're not using this for animations, you can get away with something this low. There, no geometric distortion anymore. Forgotten lectures. I hate the new screen. Okay, good to know. You don't like it? Oh, Jeff suffered until he updated the drivers. Yeah, so it's one of those things. WebSol, I've updated. I like they added a tip file exports. That's true. But I hate all the program adds to the screen. Gotcha, yes. And the dim thing. Okay, gotcha. Well, so this is something I always recommend this. I don't actually work with the release version. I work with the beta versions, and that means you get a little bit of ahead of time, you know what's coming. If you want to avoid this, just move the HDRI, I think, to a different position so that it's not in the crack of the cube here. So Y, sorry, not Y origin, I'm sorry, I meant Y orientation here. Let's do that. Somehow, let's try. There we go. And just, oh no, we can't do it. It's too small. It's just too small. It cuts off the buildings here. It's too small. It's cutting the ceiling off here. So yeah, we can't have that. We can't have that. So 5 is too low for that. Got to be at least 8, and then we can see the building slightly better than before. We're still cutting off the roof here. So yeah, 10. I think don't go lower than 10, or just don't show the roof. Also an option. So what I do is I don't tend to work with the release version. I tend to work with the beta versions. What the benefit of that is that you can update the beta version always to the latest version and keep the release version at a previous version. Therefore, if a new version comes out, you get to test out the new features and see if it works for you. And if you have a production that's currently ongoing, you think, are you not going to update the release version until everything is fixed so that you can then go and do that. So you can reap the benefits of the latest version by having the beta version running, and don't update the release version until you're absolutely happy it's doing everything you need to. So that is what I always recommend. Get the beta version. It's Daz3D.com/Daz-Studio-beta. You have to check that product out, and then it appears as a separate thing that you can install, so they can live side by side on your computer. Very, very important. Correct, Andrew. Absolutely correct. It's the box, the multiplier here. If you just make it larger, then that's how that works. That's how you can do that. Let me go and render one out that has all the background cars and all that in here. Let's go switch Iray off. So that's another mode. In Unreal Engine, there's so many modes, and in ours we can go this little icon at the top here. If you switch that from selected viewport to simulate, then it basically presses that simulate button for you, which also means it needs a moment here now to catch up. But at that point, it goes and starts all the traffic and all the pedestrians. There are even parameters that you can make the traffic or the pedestrians denser if you like. And funny enough, and I'll show you this once we've captured this, Unreal Engine actually uses HDRIs as part of their own textures. If you look at any of these windows here, if you walk close to them, you can see right into the room, but there's no geometry behind it. It's just the HDRI that's projected on the window, and that means you've got this funky parallax effect going, that you can look into the window, look left and right, and kind of strafe, and you see the perspective shifting at the back. It's really, really cool. There we go. We've got cars waiting, pedestrians. Do we have pedestrians? Yes, some. Looks like we need more pedestrians, huh? See if I can make that happen. I think in the outliner, there's one object that's in charge of traffic and pedestrians. Whoops. Did Unreal Engine just crash on me? I think it did. What a shame. Send and restart. Let's try this again. You can't have too many assets. No, you can't. Well, forgotten lectures. I know that Daz Central has been discontinued, so they don't update that anymore, and they encourage people to use Install Manager. And that's the only one that is being offered now. But I didn't know they had maybe disabled some API backends for Central. That's possible, because I've heard this before from other people that they said, hey, Daz Central has stopped working for me. What's going on? And yeah, the reason is that Daz Central has officially been discontinued. So yeah, use Install Manager from now on. I need 257 gigabytes of RAM. Dang! What is the resource thing showing me now? So it looks like I don't. At this case, it looks like it's fairly harmless. I've had it before. Depending on what you do with Unreal Engine, this thing can eat up a lot of RAM. Also, Adobe apps, they love eating RAM. They absolutely love it. I think this kind of an automation that's in there. When you go into the settings, it says, oh yeah, so we're allowed to use 90% of your system RAM, and other apps, they can use the rest of the 10%. There we go. We're back. Yes, it always surprises me when people use Unreal Engine as a production engine, because it is just so unpredictable sometimes. It's a fantastic program, but if you do experience crashes, it happens to everyone. So it's not just you. It's not just your computer. Let me increase the pedestrians here. Well, first of all, collapse everything, so that makes it a little easier for me to see. Crowd. There's a blueprint called the Mass Crowd Spawner, and that one is in charge of the crowd. So currently we're spawning 5,000. Let's try 20,000, so that we see more people. And Save everything. See if it works. And see if our cube capture camera, I think, is still where it was supposed to be, right? And then we'll bring that HDR into Daz Studio, maybe in a completely new scene. And I'll just show you one more time how to get through the HDRI values just so that it sinks in. And then my plan is, because we have another hour to go, how to use the foliage tools inside of Unreal Engine so that you can create outdoor levels literally from scratch inside Unreal Engine. I didn't even know that file existed, X201. I don't think I did then. Shouldn't that happen automatically? I know nothing about these things. I just use them until they crash. Thank you for the tip. What should I be setting in that file if I were so inclined? Just out of curiosity. himem.bat, himemsys.bat. Don't think I've ever heard of that. Last time I edited bat files was on the 386 computers to run video games. Oh, I remember now. Right. This is what I had to do. Yes. To make games run from DOS, right? Fantastic. We're both showing our age. We're nearly there. Preparing sound waves. Brian, you had a really interesting demo once where a developer used this very set here, and they had AI pedestrians walk around that you could interact with, right? Do you remember that? I remember. That was hilarious. And you could literally speak to the AI pedestrians and ask them things, and their AI voices and AI brains would process these things. It's very, very exciting. Still preparing things. Don't see any traffic just yet. I want to render one out with traffic. Come on. Traffic and pedestrians. They're coming. They're coming. All 20,000 of you. Any cars? No cars yet. But a lot of pedestrians are coming in. Oh, the Replica Studios demo. Right, yes, that rings a bell. It's the lunch hour, yes. Yep, he's stepping away from the road here. Very good. Still loading things in. Now here's the cars. First the parked cars. Do we actually have our cube target in? Oh no, again! Sorry about this. In an ideal world, it wouldn't crash like it hadn't during the rehearsals, but hey, of course now it does. So one of those things. I'll go send and close, and we'll get on with the rest of the thing I had planned. So it would have been the same thing, but let me just go just in the interest of us remembering how to set this up in Daz Studio. Let me go and start a brand new scene here, and not save what I have. And just show you one more time how to put these things in, just so that we all remember that, because I think, you know, learning by repetition is the way to go. So your HDRIs, they go on the render settings tab. If that isn't open, window, panes, tabs, render settings, dock that somewhere sensibly. And then on there under environment dome, or just environment at the top here, you can click on this little texture and browse to your own HDRI, wherever it might be. Open that, wait a second until this yellow bar at the bottom right disappears. Make sure that the draw dome is enabled if you want to see your HDRI. It might show up slightly faster in Iray than in Filament, so we're in the lucky position that it's already shown up here. If you see something like this, you can just go and change your render preset to active viewport so that Iray fills out the whole viewport. And then under dome, under the either environment intensity or map, either way will work fine. Make sure it gets exposed properly. So I think in this case, it was 0.01 to make it look nice. Here you can also see these little jaggies here on the side. So that's something you can blur out with environment lighting blur. And this gets a bit fuzzier. Depends on if that's what you want. I think it also gets better when you go and increase the environment lighting resolution. Let's say 2048. No, it does not. So sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So this setting that higher will get you better quality render out of that. Dome Y orientation will rotate the dome. So if you have a framing but you want a different type of background and you don't mind about the lighting, you can go and turn that around with dome orientation Y. Then with objects in here, I'll just use a couple of spheres. It's massive. I'll go and duplicate that. If you had multiple objects and you wanted one to sink into the ground a little bit, like with shoes, you might not want to see that, shoes slightly hovering. You might want to sink them into the ground just ever so slightly. Make sure under the ground option, render settings, environment ground, you set the ground position mode from auto to manual. Otherwise, the lowest object in the scene will be where the ground is drawn. And then you can go and change the ground Y origin to move that up or down. And then last but not least, under dome, you can change the dome mode from infinite sphere to finite sphere or finite box, and then change the dome scale multiplier to something lower so that you see more of your HDRI coming in. And disclaimer, don't set it under anything like 10, and it really depends on the contents of your HDRI, what looks good and what doesn't. So in this case, it looks like 10 is not crashing into any rooftops here. But if you do see geometric distortions, then yeah, sphere, switch it out and move it, switch it to finite box. And then if we wanted to change any of the materials here, we don't even have to load in a material. You can just go make yourself one from scratch. So metallicity you can crank up, then these objects become metallic. And then if you wanted to head over to glossy roughness and make that a little rough, then you get yourself something like this. And then diffuse color, you can go and turn this into something like a blue ball. So even without having a material there, just by playing with those values. Hey, that is good to know. I'm glad you're getting story ideas. Do you know, I don't think they're missing shadows. They're so soft in this case, they almost don't show up. You could change the weather, I suppose, in this set. But yeah, pick it up and have a play with it. This is so much good stuff that you can make with that. I need this for something where office buildings are on higher floors, and it's very difficult to get perspective shots like that. One thing I was going to show you is, if you do examine that set, go close to these windows here and just have a look at what the perspective change is. So quite exciting to see that in the Unreal Engine set. Let me go and show you something else about environments, and that is something that I've made this earlier, and we can turn this into a HDRI, but we're also going to make this something similar like this from scratch now with the built-in foliage tools and landscape tools inside Unreal Engine. They're my absolute favorite, and it's one of those things where Unreal Engine really shines as a content creation tool. Like, you remember back in the day when we had Bryce and Carrara and similar apps where you would make kind of a plane that would then turn into your landscape. You can still do that in Blender, and then you put in objects. You might even use replicators for that, and then eventually you have something like just put lots of objects in it, and eventually you have a landscape like this. And this, we can probably make this together in like 20 minutes or so, because all these tools exist in Unreal Engine. And this works not by dragging them in one by one, like every single grass stalk, every single flower isn't dragged in here. We just paint them on, and we can do more. We can go and sculpt the whole landscape here ourselves. So I had designed this so that we're only ever looking into this direction, so hence the back doesn't look great, but we're going to create all this from scratch, and then we're going to turn it into a HDRI, because that's just, that's what we can do. So fantastic stuff. Right, Andre, that is very possible. I wonder though if the NVIDIA guys know about it, or rather I say the NVIDIA guys, the guys who make Iray, and if we should bring it to their attention somehow. So let's go and make something like this. So the way this works is there's an object in my outliner here, well partitioned. I'll go and close that. There's an object that's called the landscape, and this is what it looks like. But it starts out as a completely flat plane, and then we're going to go and turn these little bumps in there. We're going to go sculpt them in there. Then we have a foliage actor in here, and that is something rather special in that you use regular meshes to draw these things. So there's everything that's yellow is the foliage actor, and when you switch it off, then all of these guys disappear. So they're all drawn on the same draw call that makes it very cheap to render, but they also animate. So if you look closely, you can see that leaves are moving ever so slightly subtly. Do they not? They totally don't. So grass, I'm sure, is moving somewhere, and it's kind of nice to see that grass. Right, there we go. Grass is moving. So they came in as regular meshes, and then you group them together, and you take a giant paintbrush and put them on where they need to be. And this is something that is just super enjoyable. And the same with the rocks here. So we're going to go paint the rocks, and the path, that is a spline path. So that's a few spline points that are set, and then we're going to go and add a mesh to it that then follows the landscape. So very interesting. Let me show you some concepts and hopefully get you excited about how you would go and work with Unreal Engine. I'm going to go and start this in this project, or shall I do it from scratch? What do you think? I'll do this in this project. I'm using something called, Brian's just posted a link for that. It's a product that is called the Meadow Environment Set by Nature Manufacture. And it has several objects in here that allow you to start making this. That's a paid for product from the Unreal Engine store, but you can get these things for free and then kit bash multiple products together. I'm choosing this because it's relatively easy to get started. Let me go and start actually totally from scratch. From scratch. Now it's going to take too long. I'm going to go to do this from here. I'm going to go and create a brand new level, and I'm calling it Landscape 3 because that's easy. I'm going to start with a basic level here, and that always comes in like this. So it's relatively bland lighting, but there is a sky and there's also a floor in here. And I'm going to delete all my lights, in fact, and the floor also shortly. And now I have no lights, so I'm seeing black, exactly what I'm expecting. I'm using a second product that is my go-to outdoor lighting solution, and that's called Ultra Dynamic Sky. Let me go and save this first. Save current level as Landscape 3. There we go, perfect. Ultra Dynamic Sky is a blueprint, or two blueprints that you drag in. One is called Ultra Dynamic Sky. And then we have everything back, but with the advantage that it is now adjustable. And that's why I'm using it, because outdoor lighting is one of those things you can really sink your teeth into that. Or if you're more like me and you want to click and dial in a value and get going, that's the product for you, really. It also comes with something called the Ultra Dynamic Weather. I'm going to drag that in, and it finds the previous actor in there. And just by default, it goes in rains. It can do all kinds of other stuff. It can create snow and create snowstorms and all that, but I'm going to go and with that selected here, Ultra Dynamic Weather, I'm going to go and pick myself a weather preset that they have here. So you've got clear skies, and drop downs like that make it really easy. You got foggy, that's kind of nice, but I think what we need, maybe we make a foggy scene out of our landscape. I'm going to use partly cloudy here, just because that looks very similar to the mood I want. So the beauty of this ultra dynamic sky product is that when I go here, I can go and just change the time of day like a video game would. Currently it's 9:60. That's kind of, let's say it's 10 o'clock, but you can change it to something like 3 o'clock, 1500, and then the position of the sun changes and the light mood changes. If you change it to kind of, 6 in the morning, sun's just getting up. There's a bit of a moon that we can see here. Sun's about to come up here, maybe 7:30. Sun's already coming up. You can change the size of the sun, you can change the color of the sun, and so forth. So like maybe 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock looks like a good working light, or maybe kind of 3 o'clock here. 3 o'clock's a good working light. So then to begin with our, oh, that's good. Hey, Julia, that's amazing. I didn't know that. Very, very cool. Yes, I think Epic also have a big Black Friday sale on. So this is our basic level that we start with. So you can also do this, of course, without Ultra Dynamic Sky, but it gives you that little extra help to get going there. I'm going to go and switch over here from selection mode. That's where you select all these objects and move them around. There's several here. There's landscape mode and foliage mode. So we're going to use those. And there's other things that Unreal Engine can do, but landscape mode is one with which I'll get started putting in that new object. So this is going to become the mountains. I'll leave all the defaults, 63 quads here, one section, and I'll just go and say create. And that creates me a landscape that I can now go ahead and sculpt. You can, a bit like in ZBrush, if you're familiar with sculpting in ZBrush, you can do it on the actual object, or you can use layers. That's what I might do. I might go and right click on where it says layers here, height map. I'm going to go and right click, oh no, here, sorry, this layer, so I'm going to go and create a layer and rename it as well. And I'll just call that landscape. It's set to 1, but if you go, actually I shouldn't call that landscape, I should call that mountains. And then if I dial in something that is too much, I can always dial it down a little bit. So you can have, one thing that makes mountains, or just one type of mountain, and then another one that makes kind of a lake, and you can put that all on layers and then dial them in and out if you want to go and do that. So with this, there's a couple of ways to sculpt now. We're already in sculpt mode here, and this means you're painting with a circular brush. If I left click and drag, things come out. That's kind of cool. If you hold shift, you go in. So click nothing and it comes out. Click shift and it goes in. Whoops. That was control, that wasn't shift. And this is our floor that we saw there earlier. I might just go and get rid of that. You'll come into selection mode, select that, delete the floor. And now we have something like a really wonky landscape here. That's not very good. But we can do other things with it. So if I've made it too bumpy, for example, I can go and use the flatten mode, or the smooth mode rather. If I go over that, it goes and smooths this out, so it becomes more smooth. That's quite nice. Go back to sculpt mode and maybe go and put some mountains in the background here. You can also use the square brackets to make these larger. You can also use a graphics tablet to do this. So I'm thinking if this is our shot and the sun is kind of behind us here, maybe goes down potentially, this could be a nice landscape in the background. Make it smaller to put more detailed mountains in here. You can also sculpt with alphas. That's also quite nice if you wanted to ever do that. And there's a website called Unreal Ecosystem. You get a pack of free alphas that let you draw them out like you would do in ZBrush. And that's quite nice. And that's here. That's the second icon if you want to do that. I think I have them in my downloads folder. And this one's actually still in there, the volcanic one. So this is where you download a texture, you put that in here, and then you left click and drag this out. And then you don't have a kind of featureless brush anymore. You have something that has a bit of detail, and that makes the mountains just look a little bit nicer. Thank you, Brian. Exactly, that's the one. And you get these if you just sign up to the newsletter, and then he gives you this free packs, about 8 or so brushes. So that is a little bit more, there's a bit more features in there than in the flat one here. It works going in as well, so you can go and sculpt things out with the alpha as well. Maybe these could be our background mounted. So I'm thinking of a shot something like this. If I just want to lock that in, I'll hit Control and one of the numbers 1 to 0, and that becomes a camera bookmark. So I can easily go back to this. So if I go and move over here now, do some detailed work like on this here. And then I'm thinking, what does my shot actually look like? Press 1 on the keyboard and it goes back to where that bookmark was created. So very, very good to get into the habit of doing that. So let's deal with materials next. Just rudimentary. This would take another half hour if I were to put a multi-layered material on this, so I'm not going to do that. Currently it's got this black and white checkerboard pattern on there, but that's of course not what I want my landscape to look like. I'm going to go and select the landscape and then scroll down to where it says the landscape material, and you can go and pick one from this Meadow environments pack under environments, foliage materials. No, I don't think that's it. It is in landscape. There we go. Landscape materials. And these are all things that could end up on a landscape. Typically, you wouldn't just put one material on it. You'd have a very complex graph that goes and avoids these repetitions that we've all seen on basic shaders. So if I go and click this one here, just the green landscape here, and then I click this icon, then that same material will be applied to the whole landscape, and that might look okay as I'm close down here. No, it doesn't even look good here. But if you go further back, you see this whole repetition thing going, and that's not very nice. So let's find ourselves another material. Maybe this one here, MI Meadow Grass. Let's do that. So this looks a little better, but there's still not a lot of variation in there. If I'm really close, it looks pretty good. And since this is what we're going to see, I'm going to probably go and use that. I was a little bit high up there on my bookmark, so I'm going to go and do something maybe like this. So this is what my shot's going to be. I might just ditch that in here a little bit, make that, put a little bit of variation in there. But yeah, Control 1, that's going to be kind of my shot here. So there is a way in the landscape to add additional material layers down here, and then have the option in paint mode here to literally paint different types of materials in. But that's going to take a long time to set up, so I might do another video on that in the future if you're interested in that. It gives you full control over painting in snow-capped mountains here, painting something like rock face in here, and then doing grass here and then varying that. There's also an option to make this automated by use of a height shader, but I'm not going to use that either. It's going to be a good starting point here for our landscape. I might go and just add just a few variations here, just so that it's not completely flat. There. Well, that's going to be my shot. Perfect. So with this, let's see if we can draw a path on this with spline points. That's another very exciting thing that you can do. It also happens in landscape mode, but it happens in manage, and then here splines. So it's a little convoluted to do this, but if I go and start kind of outside here and then start kind of here, and I'll control left click here, then I see these little dots appear, and I'll just make kind of a windy road here that goes and leads to the mountains. I don't know how good that's gonna be. It's a little bit of trial and error. So with that, select all the control points. Here they are. Yep, save it. Select all the control points, and then we can add a mesh to the control points. That's down here. I think there's one that's called path, and that will go and generate my path here. So I could have set more points, and any mesh, it could be a road, it could be like, you know, train tracks, that would just be grouped together like this. It's not completely perfect here, but with a few value changes, we can turn it into the path of our dreams. Also, had I used more spline points, this would blend better into itself. So I think under mesh scale here, let me go and use Y and turn that into something like 5. Yeah, that makes it wider path. And that's already much better. And then we still see these disconnected bits and pieces here. And that happens because the mesh that comes with this is rather long. Usually they give you really short things so that it makes nice curves. This one doesn't really have that, but if we make it a little longer, maybe 1.5, then these things blend into one another a little bit better. And notice how it follows the height of the landscape. So even though we have varying height here, I should have maybe put more curve points into this here. And you make it too long, then they just, you know, they don't really blend into one another anymore. So it'll just have to do two might work. 2 might work. Yeah, so more spline points would have solved the problem here. But yeah, this is kind of a path. Since we don't really need to see how well that looks at the back, we're only concerned with it on the front. I might just go and change this back to 1.5 here. Oh, where is that button? Is that this? So sorry about that. Thank you for reminding me. I'll come back into Vision once we're done going through this. So what I've changed here, because I can't scroll up more here, it's this here. It's the mesh scale. This is where the mesh is. That's where you designate the mesh that goes into these points, or these segments rather. And this is the scale. This is the length of the mesh. So I'm going to put this into like 1, then these things become shorter, and if I turn this up, then they become longer. But it's kind of difficult to put this to put this into, you know, blend them into one another. Make them too long, then it looks like a total mess. So I think 1.5 is okay. And then here the mesh scale on the Y, that's how wide the path is. So 10 means a wider path, 5 means slightly narrower path. That's what I was doing here. So yeah, thank you so much for reminding me. I appreciate that. Yes, and now we're going to come to the happy little trees. I think there's a couple of other things that we need. There's foliage, trees, and rocks. And foliage is something like grass and stuff like that. Let's do that. That isn't happening in landscape mode. That is happening in foliage mode. I'll go and save this first of all. And let's start with grass. So grass, and that's in foliage mode here. Grass gets dropped here. We have several grass meshes. That's under environment foliage. You can use any mesh, even stuff you import. You could import people and then use them as a foliage drawing mesh. You could like draw thousands of people into the background if you want to do that. Under meshes, these are all the meshes that come with this pack. I think I'm going to go and search for grass, and I don't think I need all of them. Like this is kind of dead grass here. I'm just going to go and pick these, maybe this one. These two and a bit of a grass bushel here, and this perhaps. And then I'm going to go and left click and drag them all into here where it says drop foliage here. And when you do that, there testing, testing. Oh, there's audio. How exciting. Do you know what it was? It's one of those things you just have to wiggle the thing, take it out and reseat the connector. I'm so glad you spotted that, guys. And I'm so glad it was an easy fix too. Because OBS, I gotta tell you, OBS can be a little bit funny when it comes to audio. If anything happens with your microphone and it goes into different USB slots by accident, it's just a nightmare to get it back while you're live on air. So I'm so glad kicking it worked, yes. When we're dragging the, okay, perfect. Let me do that again. Thank you, Brian. That's well remembered. So we've brought some foliage elements in here, and I was showing you how we can literally draw them out with a brush like this. And what I'm adjusting here now, just quickly, is I'll just select the first one, shift select the last one so that they're all selected here, and then I can go down here, and what was bugging me is that they all have the same size, and the scale X is what's confirming that. So scaling is happening uniform, which is good, but every object is drawn at exactly the same size. If you want to have a little bit of variation in there, we might want to have this going from 0.5 to make it slightly smaller to 1, so that the largest ones look like this, but we also have smaller ones. So let me go and hold shift and then go over this to delete everything, because that's just how super quick and easy this works. I'm going to go switch over to my tablet in a moment, because when it comes to detail painting, it's actually much cooler to do that. So if I do this now, I do see a lot of size variation there, and it looks more like a natural phenomenon that occurs here. One other thing you can change is how dense you want these things to appear. So there's two things what you can do there. You can paint with a different density. So set that lower, and less stuff will appear through the way you paint it. I might go and put this back to 0.5. These are all just tests before I start with the real thing in a moment. Or you can also go and specify on a per item basis how dense you want that to be drawn. And that's down here under density. So if I go and crank this up to 500 for a laugh, then we'll see that there's a ton of more grass being drawn. So we can do that. I think maybe, is that too much? It's a setting to remember, because if you do that with trees, it looks hilarious. So let's go and put this. Actually, 500 was just fine, wasn't it? So 500 it is. And then let's go, let me go use my tablet actually. Oops. And then since this is our shot, I'm going to go and start painting things here on the outside, and then kind of here, and then over here and over here. I'm just setting myself some points that I know where that is, where I'm seeing this. And then I can go make this a little slimmer here, so we have more screen real estate. And this is the pattern that I'm going to draw this in. And you can put this, you can make the brush larger as well. When you make it too large, you get this performance issues here. I think this might be my old pen that isn't quite working the way I wanted it to, so it's good for detail work here, but it's not so good for what I had actually planned. Brush size is something you can make bigger, I think up to 2048 or even larger. Just put all of that meadow down in one fair swoop here, where you see it. Obviously don't worry about portions that you don't see. And I think I've gone over the path here a little bit. That's also okay. Once you get used to these tools, it is so much fun to play with. I gotta tell you, it's very addictive to make your own landscapes, only because it's just so slick how this works. Now we're not going to see this in this ditch, so I'm not going to worry about it, but we will see it up here on the hills, I bet. And even though it looks like there's not much going on, these are just the levels of detail that we see now. So the moment you can see how many thousands of iterations are being painted. If I go close up here, I can see things are coming in. So I'll just sketch this out here so that we know where we might have to spend some more time later. It might well be. There's another way to do this by not painting this in. You can use a foliage spawner and just dedicate a volume and tell Unreal Engine, in this volume, if you intersect with a landscape, put these types of grass meshes in, and then it puts it literally everywhere. That's another way to do it, and that's very fast. Now down here on this path here, let me go and make my brush a bit smaller. And I'll go and erase, not with 0, but maybe with 0.3. Oops, forgot to press Shift. And maybe with more, like 0.9. Nope, gotta be with that maybe. Come on. I want to just bring the path back because my poor path has been overgrown a little bit too much. I don't mind it being overgrown a little bit, but 0 takes everything away. See if we can find the path. There we go. Path is back. Well trodden. I think it's going over here. Almost. Yes, here it is. And it's quite remarkable just how much work is going on in the background here. I'm very impressed by that. If you erase with a lower density, then you avoid this rather straight edge here. So if you want to thin the grass out, this is where the path goes. You can go and erase with something that isn't 0. 0 does everything, and then 0.5 would only erase half of it. So like on these edges here, I can go over and just thin the grass out. Always holding down Shift to make that thinning out motion happening here. This is where a path breaks down a little bit. I think it does. Yeah, so this thins it out, and then 0 completely gets rid of stuff that you don't want to see anymore. So we're going to mix this up with trees as well as flowers in a minute as well. What's that path looking like now? Oh, that's where it goes. Gotcha. Come on, buddy. It's a very rough path, I have to say. Very rough path. What does it look like for me? Yeah, that's fine. We don't even see the back here. So that's a path. I might go and tidy this up a little bit. Make that a bit more pronounced. Well, perfect. That is a good path, I gotta tell you. But the meadow looks boring, so if we wanted to put something else in there that isn't just grass, let's go and do that. I'm gonna go and unselect all of these guys and then go and search for flowers. And so this is why this pack is kind of convenient, because it has all these things in there. But you can go to the Quixel store or to the Quixel bridge and pick these things individually if you like. I might go and pick these two, and maybe a couple of red ones, and maybe a couple of lilac ones, and maybe one yellow one. And I don't really know what they're gonna look like. But if we go left click and drag them into here, we now have both grass as well as flowers in here. So this is where this tab gets a little disorganized, but it's just a matter of knowing how to deal with that. So I can also search in here like for flowers, and then only my flowers will show up. They're already pre-selected because that's the last item I've dragged in here. These little tick marks are here. If I hover over grass, that's currently not selected. So this tick mark means this is what you're going to draw with. But if you want to change any parameters, you have to select one or multiple of these, and then this window on the bottom comes up, and then you can change things like the density and stuff for for things. I might go and just test this again here just by itself and see if those are. And that looks good, but I think if I add that into my foliage, I feel like this is going to be a little bit too much. I think these are just a bit too dense. I'm thinking maybe just less density here. 20, and then also radius, I might put that all over to 50. This is kind of how close to one another these things are allowed to be. Still a little dense. Are they selected? Yeah, they're selected. And then, of course, I can go and say, that might be a little better here. Oops. And then, of course, I can override all that with my paintbrush and see how dense I want to paint things in. So like here, see what that looks like. They are actually not big enough, I find. I would like for them to be a little bigger. So we're starting, maybe this is the uniform scaling at 1, and we're going to make them up to twice as big. Let's do that. They're not bad. Could even be bigger. It's enough to sketch in this little bit of, there's something more going on than just grass. I like that. These, I think they either need to be mixed in with grass a little bit, or maybe there's a tree here, something like that. But yeah, you can see how that landscape's kind of coming together here, with a varying degree of stuff. Like, you can paint this thing together. You can paint grass and flowers together. That works. Yeah, not bad. Sheep. That is a great idea. Sheep is a great idea. So is saving, by the way. Let me go and do that. Fine. So we've got the landscape, we've got the mountains, we've got the grass. Let's see if we can put some trees in and see how that works. It's the same thing as before. Let's go and search for trees. And we have these poplar trees. I think I might use these optimized versions here. There's so many, but optimized is fine. There's also here these logs, and same thing. I'll go and left click and drag those into foliage types. And now the flowers are still selected, but also the trees are selected. So that's kind of confusing. I'm going to go and, oh, come on, select everything in here and just deactivate everything, just so that I know that when I go and do select the trees, only those are active and selected. And I'll see what they look like. I suppose in my test area here. Yeah, see, this is density off the scale. We probably don't want the trees to look like that because, I mean, oh my God, whose trees look like that? Nobody's. That's whose trees. Let's make that brush a bit bigger as well. Like a 500 here. Hold Shift to delete everything. And yeah, that, and maybe 5. And the radius, I don't want to be too close together here. And that's still very close together. Or that, maybe let's try density 0.1. We're getting there, we're getting there. That's certainly better, but it's still, I'm thinking, you know, 0.01 perhaps. Let's be honest. 0.01 doesn't draw anything. Gotcha. Oh, there's one tree. That's not enough density. So 0.05 then. Yes, I think that might work. I think that might work for trees. Bit of ground fog. Ooh, yes, let's see if we can make that happen. Why not, indeed? Also, a lake perhaps nearby. The thing is, once you get into this, there's so much stuff you can do, and there's a solution for everything. Then you want to see maybe the trees in the winter. How about the trees with some snow on it, or the mountains with snow on it? So it's just, you know, it's just funky to. Whoops. Ah, yes, I can see what's happening here. This tree, he's aligned to the normal. I mean, I suppose we can leave this guy like he is. I think these might be a little bit too many. So let me take some of these out and just put sporadic trees in the background here. But if I show you this on the mountain slope here, I'd like for the trees to grow up, but you can see that they really align themselves to whatever the landscape says, and that might not be fantastic in every circumstance. So there is a setting for that, which is align to normal, and if you switch that off, they're only ever gonna grow up. So if we leave those here, and if I go and paint over this slope now, you can see they're only ever growing straight up, which is nice. I suppose also they are all the same size, so that's also not good. I might go and change this from 0.7 to, well, like 0.6, so we have littler trees in the mix. And there's a bit of variation in there. Foreground trees. So let's see if we can convince Unreal Engine to put a few more background trees on here, especially on the mountains here. I might do that with a larger brush, sort of 2000 perhaps, because I think this is where I want just this. I don't want to see mountains. I really want to just see trees here, ideally. Would you now? Maybe we'll try it out. I think it's very undistinguishable from a density of 200, to be honest. But why don't we try it out, Nate? Yes, why don't we try it out? There's another thing that you'll notice if you try to paint over something like a very sharp angle here. There comes a point where Unreal Engine just doesn't want to put any tree. So down here it's fine, but then the angle goes up, and then here it doesn't want to put anything in, and then here it's happy to put things in again. That is another setting down here that is called the slope angle, ground slope angle. So it's set to 45. I'm going to be a little rash and set it to 80, and that means even here some trees are growing. %1,500 tree density. Yes, of course. Let's try it out. Now, every time you make a paint stroke, Unreal Engine has to recreate the foliage actor, by the way, because it's only one foliage actor that contains all these things. So it turns this whole thing into one piece of geometry. Isn't that amazing? Oh, there's one other thing that you need to be aware of. It's up here. Where do you want to paint things on? So I really want only the landscape, but if I would put static meshes and foliage, you'd be able to paint trees on top of grass or grass on top of trees, and that is not a good idea. So funny, Julia. So I feel like maybe some more trees could be here. It's not quite dense enough for my liking. But in principle, we're kind of, I'm liking what we're doing here. There's one other thing you can do. Currently, I'm painting in the foliage, right? That means with the paintbrush, just put it in wherever that brush goes. But there is an option here to choose single. And when you do that, it'll cycle through whatever's selected here and only ever puts a single thing. It does the same randomization in regards to size and which object it selects, but it only ever does one single object. And it also, there's a little delay because every time you add one, it has to recalculate the whole foliage actor. But if you wanted to have something like particular trees, like if I wanted to have one here and one here, I'd just be very granular about what that is like without wanting to place individual meshes into these things, which you could also do. Like you could come out of foliage mode here and then go and literally just drag in a tree like this, if you want to have a bit of variation. That works as well. And this is then controllable as an individual mesh, so that you can combine these two approaches. A little bit of variety of the dead tree here. So that also works. I think to finish it off, I'm going to go and put a few rocks just on the outside of the path here, just so that we can see it more as a path. I think I also want this to go back a little bit, so I might have to go and just have more foliage on the back here, just so that it doesn't look naff in a HDRI when we take it out. So I might just go and continue this down here a little bit. That is the melting emote. I like it, Brian. Yeah, but so far so good. I mean, that didn't take us that long. And it was quite fun to do as well. So yeah, let me go and just put essentially everything minus the trees. Grass and flowers. Oh, and not single, but we need to go into paint mode here. And maybe 500, is that good? Yeah, 500 is going well. There, this, and then we go here. Well, it looks like then we have a bigger problem then that we can't go back too far, because otherwise we see that naked mountain here, and then we have to go and dress that. So let's not go too far back. Let's just like this is going to be fine. Command 1, Control 1, that's it. Okay, rocks, and then we're kind of done. So rocks, they're just a nice finishing touch on the outside here. I think they're not in the foliage section. I think they might be in the environment section. And there's just so many rocks in here. I'm thinking maybe these small rocks, just a few of them, like these. Put that in here. Let it think about it for a second. Deselect everything. Just make sure only my rocks are selected. And this is going to be more like a smaller brush. The density might be a little high. Yeah, like an edging. This is what I was thinking here. Edging. That might even be too dense still. I'll just turn that down to 0.2 maybe. Yeah, that'll do. That'll do. How are we doing on the whole? Yes, size. I think I want to go and make them smaller, like 0.3 to 1. Like this, like a little bit of an edging here. That's all I'm thinking. That's all I'm thinking of, the stuff that is in vision. And we don't have to worry about the edge not looking great. And the great thing is that also doesn't have to be super perfect, because it's just a, I mean, which nature path would look perfect after so many years of not having been trodden by human beings and all? I feel like maybe we need to go a bit bigger here, like 0.6 maybe, or like just 0.8. Also denser still. Paint density maybe 0.4. Well, let's say we're happy here. I think I'm not actually, but I could also spend quite a long time to play with these details here. But that's also something I enjoy, that like just spending time on stuff you're having fun with. I mean, you know, why not? So a few rocks here and a little bit of a crooked tree. That's nice. And let's see where we want our HDRI to be. I mean, all of this looks great, but some of it might not translate well into HDRI. Like a ground shot like this, I'm not sure if that's going to look great. We always need to have something for people to stand in. So I'll try something like this. Maybe one other change is the lighting, that I'm thinking perhaps the sun could be a little bit lower, and it could also be a bit bigger. And that's, of course, something that's difficult to do unless you have ultra dynamic sky. And then you say maybe 4 o'clock. Yeah, 4 o'clock might be nice. 5 might be a bit too low. So 4:30 perhaps. And then if we search for sun radius, if we put that to, oh, that's highlight radius. Sorry, that's not what I meant. sun radius. There we go. Let's make it 5. Is that maybe a bit too much? Well, there we go. That could work. And finishing touches on the whole post-process volume. That's another thing we can do and bake right into the HDRI. So that's another object inside of Unreal Engine. It's a volume. It's called a post-process volume. And it's a bit like tone mapping in Daz Studio. If you have that in there, make sure it's set to infinite so that by default it's like a confined volume inside of which an effect happens. Like if you have a player go underwater, it would go blue, for example, and you want that to happen in the whole scene. If you want to have something that does post-production or color correction of the whole thing. And then in here, one thing is chromatic aberrations that might look nice. It might look, oops, not that, sorry, that was a bit too much. I meant that's not what I meant. I meant lens flares. Sorry about that. Lens flares, there we go. If you're into lens flares, it can make that. I don't know if that's going to work well in the HDRI, so just know that you can do this. I'm going to switch it off for now. I think what I'm going to do is here under global, I'll just change the contrast and the gamma just a little bit from 1 to 0.8 each. Make this lighter and this a little darker. So this just means the knee gets shifted a little bit from this, which looks a little washed out in certain areas, to this, which looks a little bit more natural, I find. And then while we're here, we can also go and change the gain, not so much the value, but to give it a color tint. So you can make it a bit more orangey or you know, green and terrible. I'm thinking maybe just something just like a warmish afternoon like this. There. That's a post-production thing. I suppose you can increase the saturation somewhat, but it's something you can probably do better in Daz Studio and just leave this, or even in post-production after that. Well, there we go. That's that. Save. No Man's Sky mode, yes. 1500% sun, why not? Let's see if we can turn this into a HDRI and what it looks like inside Daz Studio. So if you remember, click this, start typing scene capture cube, which then appears where exactly? Is this it? It's invisible. There it is, perfect. I just wanted to make sure G switches off all the icons here. That means sometimes if it's switched off, nothing appears. And just because we can, let's go and turn it around like this. And that's sort of in the position that I'm thinking that might look good, but of course it might not. So let's figure it out. Let's see what happens. With that, create a new cube render target, and I might call this, I might put this into HDRIs, HDRI cam. There's no spaces in Unreal Engine, by the way. You're not allowed to have spaces in there. And here it is. So that's what it looks like. Make that a bit bigger, 2048. And that doesn't look bad at all. I like it already. We made all this from scratch in literally 1 hour. So that's fairly impressive, I have to say. Then we go and find our folder. Clear that search field out. Save everything. Right click and create a static texture. And we'll name that Meadow Stream. There. And with that, right click, Asset Actions, Export. Switch it to HDR. Save it. Press Ctrl R to give my GPU a rest. And then in here, since we still have these nice little cubes here, HDR Meadow stream. There we go. Since all these HDRs that I have are basically created from scratch, would you like to have them and experiment around with them? You're more than welcome to have them if you wanted to check out the quality and if this is something you can see yourself using in one of your projects. Let me know and I can make a kind of a Google link or something available. Well, there we go. That's that. This is with the intensity reset, and then this in Iray. Oh my God, look at that. I mean, not bad at all, huh? I think these guys need to just come back a little bit so that they're more here on the path here. And it's all just an illusion, isn't it? That's just so cool. These crooked trees look even more crooked now. That's quite cool. Let me go and make a camera out of this. Create, copy that, and then we can just go and turn this here into a 2 viewport affair, and then on top of here we're going to go see the camera, check, and then down here, well, that now we need an actual proper aspect ratio, don't we? Maybe we'll go use 16:9 here. There, let's say that's our framing. So now we can go and put this guy closer to here, and then this guy likewise put him here. Well, perfect. And I'll let you put in the characters and make it look really handsome. Hey, not bad at all, I have to say. It's windy. This was fun. We have ground shadows. We have all the rest of it. Let me go and put this guy on the ground as well. We know how to sync them in. Y translate there. Not bad. I'm thinking X translate sort of further kind of here like this. Perfect. A couple of funky balls out on a straw. I like that. That's nice. This guy, let's make him metallic as well. Groovy. Click this and then, you know, oh yeah, and then of course final touches. If we did want to add something like more intensity here or whatnot, more saturation, put a bit of a vignette here, 20. You can do that in Unreal Engine as well. But, you know, if you wanted to leave that up to the last minute, this is probably what I would do. Burn highlights, crush blacks to make it a bit more dramatic. And perhaps then saturation, put that to 1.1, make it pop a little bit more. Something like that. And that is that. It is, isn't it? Let's NFT it. Let's see what happens. Let's NFT it. Maybe it's a bit too punchy. Hey, there we go, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you being here. I hope you've learned a lot. And, you know, go ahead and play with this. You can't really break anything. It's just a wonderful pipeline to say, hey, Unreal Engine is difficult. No two ways about it. But as long as you can manage to load in a set that you have, turn that into a HDRI, you have many of the benefits that Unreal Engine offers right inside Daz Studio. Keep using that, render your characters lightning speed, and, you know, tell stories and make something amazing with it. And if you want to tag me with something that you've made on what's formerly known as Twitter, please do so. I'm always excited to see what you guys are making. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of Thanksgiving weekend, and I'm hoping I will see you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.